Comment where you're watching from today, as we share the story of how an ordinary day at a Los Angeles luxury car dealership became the catalyst for a movement that would challenge workplace discrimination and remind the world that sometimes heroes appear in the most unexpected ways. The morning sun glinted off the polished surfaces of high-end vehicles at Elite Motors, where success was measured in commission percentages and customer satisfaction ratings. Among the sales team, one person stood out: Aster Williams, a single mother whose warm smile and genuine approach had earned her the highest customer satisfaction scores in the dealership's history. But on this particular morning, something was different. The usual bustle of the showroom was overshadowed by tension as Marcus Reynolds, the newly appointed general manager, made his way through the floor, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the polished marble. Reynolds had been brought in to modernize the dealership's image, but his real impact had been far less professional. For the past 3 months, Aster had watched as her colleagues were slowly replaced by younger, less experienced sales representatives who fit Reynolds' idea of the right image for the dealership. Being the only African-American woman on the sales floor, she had felt his disapproving glances and heard the whispered comments about updating the staff profile. What Reynolds didn't know was that his actions were about to attract the attention of someone who had no tolerance for injustice. Jason Statham, known worldwide for his action movies, had chosen this particular morning to purchase a new vehicle, though fame and fortune weren't what would define his actions that day. The dealership floor was relatively quiet when Statham entered, dressed casually in a black t-shirt and jeans. He moved through the showroom with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark, observing the dynamics of the space with the keen eye of someone who had spent years reading human behavior for his craft. Aster was helping another customer when Statham arrived, her professional demeanor and extensive knowledge of the vehicles on display clearly evident in her interaction. She had just closed a successful sale, her customer beaming with satisfaction, when Reynolds approached her desk with a thin manila folder in his hands. "Ms. Williams," his voice carried across the showroom, loud enough to draw attention but carefully modulated to maintain a facade of professionalism. "A word in my office, please." The smirk playing at the corners of his mouth suggested this was more than a routine meeting. Statham, who had been examining a luxury SUV nearby, noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere. Other sales representatives quickly looked away, their body language speaking volumes about the tension in the air. But it was Aster's reaction that caught his attention. The slight straightening of her spine, the professional mask that couldn't quite hide her apprehension. As Aster gathered her things to follow Reynolds, Statham overheard a whispered conversation between 2 younger sales representatives. "That's the 3rd one this month," one murmured. "Reynolds is cleaning house. Says he wants a more contemporary image for the dealership." The word contemporary hung in the air, its implied meaning clear to everyone who had witnessed Reynolds' pattern of replacing experienced staff members with younger, less diverse employees. But what happened next would transform this private injustice into a very public stand against discrimination. Reynolds' office, with its glass walls overlooking the showroom, became the stage for what was about to unfold. Those on the sales floor could see but not hear as he gestured dismissively at Aster, sliding the manila folder across his desk. His expression was one of practiced condescension as he delivered what was clearly unwelcome news. Aster's composure began to crack as she opened the folder. Her hands trembled slightly as she read what appeared to be a termination notice. "But my sales numbers are the highest in the department," her voice carried faintly through the glass. "My customer satisfaction ratings." Reynolds cut her off with a wave of his hand. "It's not about the numbers, Ms. Williams. It's about fitting the image we're trying to project. We're moving in a new direction, and frankly, you're not what we're looking for anymore." The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Aster, a single mother who had worked at Elite Motors for 7 years, who had put herself through night school while raising her daughter, who had never missed a day of work, was being dismissed not for her performance, but for not fitting someone's idea of the right image. What Reynolds didn't notice, as he delivered his practice speech about corporate direction and image consciousness, was that Jason Statham had positioned himself near the office, his athletic frame leaning against a display vehicle, his expression growing darker with each passing moment. Astor's voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Reynolds, I have a daughter in college. I've never had a customer complaint. My sales numbers are consistently top tier. If this is about my age or my—" "Ms. Williams," Reynolds interrupted, his tone dripping with false sympathy, "let's not make this about something it's not. The decision has been made. We'll give you 2 weeks severance, which is more than generous considering the circumstances." It was at this moment that Statham pushed himself away from the vehicle he'd been examining and made his way toward Reynolds' office. The other sales representatives watched, holding their breath, as the action star's purposeful stride carried him straight to the glass door. Reynolds looked up, annoyed at the interruption, then froze as he recognized who had just entered his office. The practiced smile he reserved for VIP customers spread across his face, but before he could speak, Statham's voice, quiet but carrying the intensity that had made him famous, filled the room. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said, his tone deceptively casual. "You're firing this woman because she doesn't fit your image?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, made more powerful by its calm delivery. Reynolds stumbled over his words, suddenly aware that his private act of discrimination had acquired a very public witness. "Mr. Statham, this is a private personnel matter. I assure you, our decisions are based on careful consideration of various factors." "Various factors?" Statham repeated, moving to stand beside Astor's chair. "Like the fact that she has the highest customer satisfaction ratings in your dealership? Or that her sales numbers top your charts? Or perhaps," his voice took on an edge of steel, "it's about other factors that might interest the media?" The color drained from Reynolds' face as he realized the implications of having his discriminatory practices exposed by someone of Statham's influence. But the action star wasn't finished. He turned to Astor, his expression softening. "Ms. Williams, how long have you worked here?" 7 years, she replied, her voice steady despite the emotion evident in her eyes. "I started as a junior sales associate and worked my way up. Put myself through business school at night while raising my daughter alone." Statham nodded, then turned back to Reynolds. 7 years of exemplary service. Top sales numbers. Highest customer satisfaction. And you're firing her because she doesn't fit your image." He pulled out his phone, his movements deliberate. "I wonder what the corporate office would think about that image." Reynolds' attempt at damage control was immediate but clumsy. "Mr. Statham, perhaps we've been hasty. This is clearly a misunderstanding." But Statham wasn't interested in Reynolds backpedaling. Instead, he was typing something into his phone, his expression focused. "I'm curious," he said, not looking up, "how many other employees have been terminated for not fitting your image? And how many of them shared certain characteristics with Ms. Williams?" The implications of his words hung heavy in the air. Reynolds' face had gone from pale to ashen as he realized the full scope of what was unfolding. But it was about to get worse. "You see," Statham continued, finally looking up from his phone, "I came in today planning to buy a new car. Instead, I think I've found something much more interesting, a story about discrimination, about prejudice hiding behind corporate policy, about qualified professionals being pushed out because they don't fit someone's narrow view of what success should look like." The showroom had gone completely silent, every eye fixed on the drama unfolding in the glass office. But this was just the beginning of a story that would soon capture headlines and hearts across the country, proving that sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism happen not in action movies, but in the quiet moments when someone chooses to stand up for what's right. The tension in Reynolds' glass-walled office had reached a breaking point. Jason Statham's phone continued to command attention as he scrolled through what appeared to be contact information, each swipe of his finger making the dealership's general manager more uncomfortable. "It's interesting," Statham said, his voice carrying the quiet intensity that had made him famous. "How many journalists I know who would be fascinated by this story. Discrimination at a luxury car dealership, qualified employees being pushed out based on age and race, all while hiding behind corporate buzzwords about image and direction." Reynolds shifted in his expensive leather chair, his earlier confidence evaporating under Statham's steady gaze. "Mr. Statham, I assure you there's been a misunderstanding. We value diversity at Elite Motors. Ms. Williams has been an adequate employee." Adequate. Statham's eyebrow raised as he picked up a sales report from Reynolds' desk. Top sales numbers for the past 3 quarters. Highest customer satisfaction ratings in the dealership's history. Multiple awards for excellence in customer service. He paused, letting each achievement hang in the air. Seems a bit more than adequate to me. Astor sat quietly, watching the exchange with a mixture of disbelief and growing hope. In 7 years at Elite Motors, no one had ever stood up to management like this, especially not on behalf of an employee about to be terminated. The showroom floor had grown unusually quiet, with other sales representatives and customers alike trying to appear busy while actually straining to catch every word of the confrontation. Through the glass walls, they could see Reynolds' increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of the situation. Perhaps, Reynolds tried again, his voice strained, "We could discuss this privately, Mr. Statham. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement that would be satisfactory to all parties." Statham's response was measured but firm. "You mean like paying her to keep quiet? Adding a non-disclosure agreement to her severance package?" He shook his head slowly. "That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is this." He turned to Astor, his expression softening slightly. "Ms. Williams, would you be willing to share how many other employees have been terminated since Mr. Reynolds took over? Specifically, how many were over 40 or minorities?" Astor straightened in her chair, drawing strength from Statham's steady presence. "In the past 3 months, 7 employees have been terminated. All of them were either over 40 or minorities, some both. All had excellent performance records." The action star nodded, then turned back to Reynolds. 7 qualified employees, all sharing certain characteristics, all replaced by younger, less experienced staff who fit your idea of the right image. That's not corporate restructuring, that's discrimination, plain and simple. Reynolds' face had taken on a grayish tinge as he realized the full implications of what was happening. The corporate office approved all personnel changes, he protested weakly. Everything was done according to policy. Really? Statham pulled out his phone again, this time making a call. "Let's find out what corporate thinks about these policies." He put the phone on speaker as it rang, and a woman's voice answered, "Elite Motors Corporate Office, how may I direct your call? This is Jason Statham. I need to speak with your CEO about discriminatory practices at your Beverly Hills location." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Reynolds swallowing hard. What happened next would transform this confrontation from a private dispute into a catalyst for change. The CEO of Elite Motors, Amanda Chin, came on the line within minutes, her voice carrying both authority and concern. "Mr. Statham, this is Amanda Chin. I understand you have concerns about our Beverly Hills location." The speakerphone carried her voice clearly through the office, and Reynolds seemed to shrink further into his chair. "Ms. Chin, I'm sitting in your general manager's office, where he's in the process of terminating an employee with 7 years of excellent service, top sales numbers, and the highest customer satisfaction ratings in your company's history. Would you like to know why?" Over the next 10 minutes, Statham methodically laid out the pattern of discrimination he had uncovered. He detailed the terminations, the replacement hires, and Reynolds' own words about image and direction. With each revelation, the CEO's responses grew more clipped and professional. "Mr. Reynolds," Chen's voice was ice-cold when she finally addressed her general manager. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Mr. Statham, Ms. Williams, I will be arriving personally within the hour. Please wait for me." As the call ended, Reynolds sat in stunned silence, his carefully constructed world of privilege and prejudice crumbling around him. But Statham wasn't finished. He turned to Astor once more. "Ms. Williams, would you be willing to help me make a few more calls? I think the other employees who were terminated might want to be here when Ms. Chin arrives." His question carried a weight of purpose that went beyond simple justice for one person. Over the next hour, as they waited for the CEO to arrive, something remarkable began to happen. The former employees started arriving, each with their own story of discrimination, each carrying documentation of their excellent performance records and sudden termination. Maria Rodriguez, a former sales manager with 15 years of experience, brought performance reviews showing consistent excellence right up until Reynolds decided she didn't fit the dealership's new direction. James Chin, no relation to the CEO, had been the top luxury vehicle specialist before being let go for image reasons. The showroom slowly filled with faces that told a story of systemic discrimination hidden behind corporate buzzwords and policy manuals. Each former employee carried not just documentation, but the weight of dreams derailed and careers interrupted by one man's prejudice. Statham moved among them, listening to their stories, taking notes, and occasionally making calls to contacts in the media and legal profession. His presence had transformed from movie star to advocate, his quiet intensity focused on ensuring that justice would be served. When Amanda Chen arrived, she found not just one case of discrimination, but an assembled group of former employees whose stories painted a damning picture of systemic bias. The CEO's face grew increasingly grave as she listened to account after account of qualified professionals being pushed out to make room for younger, less diverse replacements. Reynolds, still sitting in his office, watched through the glass walls as his carefully constructed world fell apart. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Now he was the one waiting to learn his fate, while those he had dismissed were being heard and validated. But the most powerful moment came when Astor stepped forward to address the CEO. "Miss Chen, I don't want just my job back. I want changes that will ensure this never happens to anyone else." "We all do." The former employees nodded in agreement, their presence a testament to the importance of standing up against discrimination. Chen looked around the showroom, taking in the faces of experienced professionals who had been wronged by prejudice masquerading as policy. Her response would set the tone for what was to come. "Ms. Williams, you're absolutely right. This isn't just about individual jobs, it's about systemic change. And change is exactly what's going to happen here." She turned to address the gathered group. "I want each of you to know that what happened here was wrong, and it ends today." The CEO's next actions would demonstrate that her words were more than corporate damage control. She announced an immediate review of all terminations under Reynolds' management, with offers of reinstatement for those who wanted to return. Additionally, she promised the implementation of new diversity and inclusion policies, with oversight from an independent committee. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated the power of standing up against discrimination. As word of the confrontation spread through social media and news outlets, other businesses began examining their own practices. The story of how an action star had stood up against workplace discrimination became a catalyst for broader conversations about bias in corporate America. Reynolds, stripped of his authority and facing an investigation that would reveal the full extent of his discriminatory practices, could only watch as his victims became advocates for change. His attempt to create an exclusive, discriminatory workplace had instead sparked a movement for inclusion and equality. The day was far from over, and the story was about to take even more surprising turns. But already, something profound had shifted in the atmosphere of Elite Motors. The silence that had allowed discrimination to flourish had been broken, replaced by voices rising in unity against injustice. As the former employees shared their stories with Chen, Statham remained present but unobtrusive, his role shifting from catalyst to witness. He understood that this moment wasn't about him. It was about people finding the courage to stand up and demand justice, about a community coming together to say no to discrimination in all its forms. The action star's intervention had provided the spark, but the fire of change was being fueled by the courage of those who had suffered in silence and were now finally being heard. This was just the beginning of a story that would inspire others to speak up, to stand firm, and to fight for what was right. The story of what happened at Elite Motors spread like wildfire through social media and news outlets. Within hours, what had begun as a confrontation in a luxury car dealership had transformed into a national conversation about workplace discrimination and the power of standing up against injustice. Amanda Chen, the CEO of Elite Motors, proved that her commitment to change was more than just damage control. The afternoon following the confrontation, she called an emergency board meeting, conducted via video conference in the dealership's main conference room. What made this meeting extraordinary was who she invited to attend. Astor Williams and the other terminated employees sat around the massive conference table, their presence a powerful statement about the company's new direction. Jason Statham, who had declined offers from various news outlets to comment on the story, chose to stay as well, his quiet presence a reminder of how this transformation had begun. The board members, appearing on the large screen mounted on the wall, listened in stunned silence as Chen methodically presented the evidence of systemic discrimination under Reynolds' management. Performance reviews, sales numbers, customer satisfaction ratings, all painted a picture of qualified professionals pushed out for no reason other than their age or ethnicity. "This stops today," Chen declared, her voice firm. "But more than that, we're going to turn this moment into an opportunity for real change." She then outlined a comprehensive plan that would reshape not just Elite Motors, but potentially the entire luxury car sales industry. The first step was immediate reinstatement offers to all employees wrongfully terminated, with back pay and compensation for emotional distress. But Chen didn't stop there. She announced the creation of a new corporate division focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she wanted Astor Williams to lead it. "Ms. Williams," Chen said, turning to face her, "you've demonstrated not just excellence in sales, but the kind of integrity and courage we need in leadership. We want you to help us build a company culture that truly values diversity and ensures nothing like this ever happens again." The promotion would come with a substantial salary increase, direct reporting to the CEO, and the authority to implement real change across all Elite Motors locations. But it was Chen's next announcement that truly demonstrated the company's commitment to transformation. "We're establishing the Elite Motors Diversity in Automotive Fellowship," she declared. "A program that will provide training, mentorship, and career opportunities to underrepresented groups in the luxury car sales industry. And we're funding it with the money we would have spent on executive bonuses this year." The board members' expressions ranged from surprise to discomfort, but none dared object. The story had already garnered too much attention, and Chen's decisive action was being praised across social media platforms. Meanwhile, Reynolds sat in a small office down the hall, meeting with corporate HR representatives who were reviewing every personnel decision he had made during his tenure. The former general manager's arrogance had been replaced by a growing realization of the consequences of his actions. But the impact of that day's events extended far beyond Elite Motors. Other luxury car dealerships, sensing the shifting winds, began announcing their own diversity initiatives. Industry publications were suddenly filled with articles about inclusion and representation in luxury sales. Statham, who had remained quietly in the background during the board meeting, finally spoke up. "This is all excellent," he said, his voice carrying its characteristic intensity, "but there's something else we need to address. What about the customers?" All eyes turned to him as he continued, "I've been listening to stories all day about how certain salespeople were told they didn't fit the right image for luxury car sales. But what message does that send to customers who might see themselves in these employees? How many sales have been lost because potential customers walked in, saw no one who looked like them, and walked right back out?" His words struck a chord, particularly with the board members who understood the business implications. Chen nodded slowly, then turned to Astor. "Ms. Williams, what are your thoughts on this?" Astor stood, her confidence growing with each moment. "Mr. Statham is right. Luxury isn't about exclusivity based on appearance. It's about quality, service, and experience. By limiting our workforce diversity, we've been limiting our market potential." She moved to the whiteboard and began outlining ideas: targeted outreach to underserved communities, multilingual sales materials, cultural competency training for all staff. Each suggestion demonstrated not just an understanding of social justice, but of business growth potential. As the meeting continued, something remarkable began to happen. The board members, initially defensive about the changes, started engaging actively with the ideas. They saw not just the moral imperative of diversity and inclusion, but the business opportunity it presented. Outside the conference room, the showroom had transformed into an impromptu media center. News crews gathered, having heard about the story through social media and press releases. But rather than focus on the scandal, they were capturing something more powerful: a story of positive change and corporate responsibility. Local community leaders began arriving, drawn by the news of what was happening. Among them was Michael Richardson, head of the Urban Youth Employment Initiative, who saw an opportunity to create pathways for young people into the luxury automotive industry. "This isn't just about correcting past wrongs," Richardson said during an impromptu interview in the showroom. "It's about creating future opportunities." Elite Motors is showing that diversity isn't just a buzzword, it's a business advantage. The day's events had created a ripple effect that was spreading far beyond the automotive industry. Other luxury brands began examining their own hiring practices and corporate cultures. Social media was filled with stories from employees in various industries, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and calling for change. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when one of Elite Motors' longtime customers, a prominent African-American business leader, arrived at the dealership. He had been buying cars there for years, always dealing exclusively with Astor because she was the only person who made him feel truly welcome. "I've spent millions here over the years," he told the assembled media, "but today is the first time I feel proud to be associated with this company. What's happening here isn't just about cars, it's about dignity, respect, and recognizing that excellence comes in all colors and ages." As the afternoon wore on, Chin announced one final initiative that would cement Elite Motors' commitment to change. The company would establish a legal defense fund for employees in the luxury retail sector who faced discrimination regardless of where they worked. "We're not just changing our company," Chin declared. "We're trying to change an industry. And that means supporting those who face discrimination anywhere in the luxury retail sector." The fund would be administered by an independent board of civil rights attorneys and industry professionals, with Astor serving as one of its advisors. It was a bold move that positioned Elite Motors as a leader in corporate social responsibility. Meanwhile, Statham had been quietly making calls to his contacts in the entertainment industry. By evening, several other celebrities had expressed interest in becoming involved with Elite Motors' diversity initiatives, offering to leverage their platforms to promote positive change. But it was Reynolds who provided the day's final dramatic moment. After hours of meetings with HR and reviewing the evidence of his discriminatory practices, he emerged from the small office looking shaken. The corporate investigators had found a pattern of bias that went beyond Elite Motors, stretching back to his previous positions at other dealerships. As he walked through the showroom, now filled with media, community leaders, and the very employees he had wronged, Reynolds faced the public humiliation he had tried so hard to avoid. But instead of escorting him out in disgrace, Astor approached him with a surprising proposal. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet showroom, "would you be willing to be the first participant in our corporate sensitivity and bias training program? To help us document how prejudice can blind even experienced managers to talent and potential." The offer wasn't about redemption, it was about education and prevention. By documenting how bias had influenced his decisions, Reynolds could help other managers recognize and correct their own prejudices before they led to discrimination. It was a moment of profound irony. The man who had tried to push Astor out because she didn't fit his image of success was now being offered a chance to contribute to her diversity and inclusion program. His response would demonstrate whether he had truly understood the lessons of the day. As the sun began to set over Los Angeles, Elite Motors had been transformed. What had started as one man's stand against discrimination had catalyzed a movement for change that would impact not just one dealership, but an entire industry. The story was far from over. Implementing real change would require ongoing commitment and effort. But something fundamental had shifted. The silence that had allowed discrimination to flourish had been broken, replaced by voices raised in unity for justice and equality. And it all began because someone chose to stop and stand up for what was right, proving that sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism happen not in action movies, but in the quiet moments when ordinary people decide to take a stand against injustice. 6 months after the confrontation that transformed Elite Motors, the luxury car dealership's showroom was once again filled with people. But this time, they weren't gathering to witness a conflict. They were there to celebrate success and recognize the power of positive change. The occasion was the launch of the Elite Motors Diversity in Automotive Leadership program, and the showroom had been transformed into an elegant event space. Display vehicles had been carefully arranged to create an intimate amphitheater setting, their polished surfaces reflecting the warm lighting that filled the space. Astor Williams, now Elite Motors' Chief Diversity Officer, stood at the podium, her presence commanding the attention of industry leaders, media representatives, and aspiring automotive professionals who had gathered for this landmark event. The past 6 months had transformed not just her career, but the entire landscape of luxury car sales. 6 months ago, she began, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had found her true calling. I stood in this showroom facing what I thought was the end of my career. Today, I stand here as proof that when we challenge discrimination and embrace diversity, everyone wins. The numbers displayed on screens throughout the showroom told a compelling story. Since implementing their new diversity initiatives, Elite Motors had seen a 40% increase in sales, with customer satisfaction ratings reaching unprecedented levels. The company's workforce now reflected the diverse community it served, and its training programs had become a model for the industry. In the audience, Jason Statham sat quietly, preferring to let the spotlight shine on the real heroes of this transformation. Though his intervention had sparked the initial change, it was the courage and dedication of people like Astor that had turned a moment of confrontation into a movement for lasting change. The changes at Elite Motors had created ripples throughout the luxury retail sector. Other dealerships, seeing the company's success, had begun implementing their own diversity programs. The legal defense fund established by Elite Motors had already helped dozens of employees challenge discriminatory practices at other companies. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation had been in the industry's culture itself. The old notion that luxury sales required a certain look or image had been replaced by an understanding that excellence comes in all forms, and that diversity isn't just about social justice, it's about business success. Amanda Chen, Elite Motors CEO, took the stage to share some unexpected statistics. In the past 6 months, our customer base has expanded by 35%, she announced. We're reaching communities that previously felt excluded from the luxury car market. It turns out that when you create an inclusive environment, everybody feels welcome to do business with you. The program's first graduating class sat in the front row, 25 individuals from diverse backgrounds who had completed intensive training in luxury vehicle sales and management. Among them was Maria Rodriguez's daughter, Carmen, who had been inspired by the changes at Elite Motors to follow in her mother's footsteps. What happened here 6 months ago, Carmen shared during her part of the presentation, showed me that change is possible. That we don't have to accept discrimination as just the way things are. That one person standing up for what's right can transform an entire industry. The event also marked the launch of a new initiative, the Elite Motors Mentorship Network. Under this program, experienced professionals from underrepresented groups would mentor newcomers to the industry, creating a pipeline of diverse talent for the future. But the most powerful moment came when Michael Richardson, the head of the Urban Youth Employment Initiative, introduced a special guest, Marcus Reynolds, the former general manager whose discriminatory practices had sparked this transformation. Reynolds had spent the past 6 months working with the Corporate Sensitivity and Bias Training Program, sharing his story as a cautionary tale about how unconscious bias can blind even experienced managers to talent and potential. His journey from perpetrator of discrimination to advocate for change had become a powerful teaching tool. I thought I was protecting the company's image, Reynolds admitted to the gathered audience. Instead, I was limiting its potential. The very people I tried to push out because they didn't fit my narrow vision of success have now created more success than I ever did. The humility in his voice was genuine, earned through months of confronting his own biases and witnessing the positive changes that came from embracing diversity. His testimony had become a crucial part of Elite Motors training programs, helping other managers recognize and address their own unconscious biases. Statham, who had remained in touch with Astor throughout the transformation, finally agreed to say a few words. His message was characteristically direct. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures or elaborate plans. Sometimes it comes from simply refusing to walk past injustice, from standing up and saying, "This isn't right." The action star's words resonated through the showroom, reminding everyone that the biggest changes often start with small acts of courage. His intervention 6 months ago hadn't just saved one person's job, It had catalyzed a transformation that was still creating positive change. The event concluded with the announcement of a new partnership between Elite Motors and several major automotive manufacturers. The companies would work together to create industry-wide standards for diversity and inclusion, ensuring that the changes sparked at one dealership would become permanent features of the automotive landscape. But the real proof of transformation could be seen in the daily operations of Elite Motors itself. The showroom floor now featured a diverse team of sales professionals, each bringing their unique perspectives and experiences to their work. Customer satisfaction had soared as clients found themselves working with representatives who understood their needs and cultures. Astor's daughter, now a college senior, sat proudly in the audience, watching her mother receive recognition for her role in this transformation. The single mom who had once worried about providing for her family had become a leader in corporate diversity and inclusion, proving that standing up for what's right can lead to unexpected opportunities. The legal defense fund established by Elite Motors had grown beyond its initial scope, now supported by contributions from multiple companies in the luxury retail sector. It had become a powerful tool for fighting discrimination throughout the industry, giving employees the resources they needed to challenge unfair practices. As the evening drew to a close, local news crews conducted interviews with various participants. The story they captured wasn't just about one company's transformation, it was about how standing up against discrimination can create positive change that benefits everyone. The Elite Motors story had become a case study in business schools, demonstrating how diversity and inclusion aren't just moral imperatives, they're smart business strategies. The company's success had proven that creating an inclusive environment leads to better performance, increased sales, and stronger customer relationships. But perhaps the most meaningful impact could be seen in the faces of young people who now saw opportunities in an industry that had once seemed closed to them. The message was clear: talent, dedication, and excellence come in all forms, and success isn't about fitting someone else's image, it's about being true to yourself and your potential. As the event concluded, Astor shared one final thought that captured the essence of this transformation. 6 months ago, someone stood up and said, "This isn't right." Today, we all stand together, not just saying it isn't right, but making it right. That's how change happens, one person, one moment, one choice at a time. The story of Elite Motors had become more than just a tale of confronting discrimination, it had become a blueprint for positive change, a reminder that standing up for what's right can transform not just one workplace, but an entire industry. And as the attendees filed out of the showroom that evening, they carried with them not just inspiration, but a challenge: to be the person who stands up, who speaks out, who refuses to walk past injustice. Because sometimes the most powerful acts of heroism happen not in dramatic confrontations, but in the quiet moments when we choose to stand up for what's right.